I think the challenge is probably even greater for Christians in the arts. Honestly, there are some churches that don't really consider art to be a very serious way to serve God. It's maybe second or third class, particularly compared to something like, being a pastor or missionary or something like that. And I think Christian artists often feel like they have to justify their existence a little bit, defend their calling. And what we really want to see is a community of support around artists in the church. I remember this is over a decade ago now, and I think things are somewhat improved on our campus because we've really invested in the arts. We've got a new building for visual arts, a growing art department. I think our artists are feeling pretty well supported. But I remember reading comments from one of our art students at Wheaton, and I just want to read you her words, and maybe there's some that are in the arts that can relate to this. God made me to be an artist. He gave me that talent. That's my response to God, to his world, to his message of salvation. When you see something that's so wonderful, you want to join. But she also talked about the challenges of trying to live out that calling in a community that wasn't always supportive. She said that by the end of her sophomore year, she was really tired of having peers that were indifferent to her calling. Others, sometimes said that she was really wasting her time, that art, these were her words, was, kind of a field for slackers and weirdos. And she said, I felt like I had to justify myself. That's a terrible thing. I'm a child of God. God made me a person who sees the world in a manner that is different from most perceptions. He gave me the urge to create. I think if you look at the history of Christianity in the arts, you see a variety of different perspectives on that. I think the church has recognized that there is a danger with the arts, which is that, like most beautiful things, valuable things, it can lend itself to idolatry. The visual image certainly can, but even music can be that way. I remember talking to a member of my church who was in the Philadelphia Orchestra, and I won't mention the name of the conductor, but it was a well-known conductor, and they had a really great rehearsal session. And as the music sort of faded away, his comment was, "Music is God." And my friend in the orchestra just felt an ambivalence about that. He understood that there was a celebration of music, which he resonated with, but he also saw an idolatry there that was getting in the way spiritually of what music really could be. And of course, I think, and this is something Christians disagree about, I won't try to argue the point here, but many Christians, particularly in the Reformation tradition, have been cautious about bringing visual images into the setting of worship if there was a danger that they could be used as objects of worship in themselves. And so there is a kind of iconoclastic tradition in the Protestant church. But because of that concern, sometimes Christians have carried that over to a concern about the arts generally. So I think there's a tension. There's a tension there. And you could look at different forms of art and the way that Christians have viewed them. There, for a long time, there was real suspicion of anything pertaining to the theater. It didn't have a good reputation for moral uprightness. That was true for many, many centuries. Then there's poetry, which I think is an art form that people largely ignore, even though for Christians it ought to be really important to us because about 40% of the Bible is written in poetic form. So if there's one thing that we really ought to invest in, it's understanding poetry and how it works. It's very important to our reading of Scripture. I think generally what I would say about the arts is what I would say about just really anything in creation. The things that God has created good, and art is certainly one of those things, and I'll explain some of the reasons why in our time together today. But like most good things, it also can be turned to sinful purposes. And so we see both the beauty and the brokenness of the human condition in the arts and in our response to the arts. And I think you do see in some art forms, and I think this is true in many ways in the 20th century, and maybe we've had a turn in this century, but particularly in the visual arts, there has been a strong anti-Christian theme running through maybe the highest echelons of the visual arts. Artists who are cynical of the truth, who are more interested in portraying what is broken than what is beautiful. And so some have talked about a tragic loss of sacred beauty in the arts, particularly in the modern and postmodern time. Here's what one art critic said. You don't have to agree necessarily with his judgment, but I'm trying to point out some of the tensions and just the context in which as Christians we're trying to pursue the arts. But he said much of the energy and effort of our artists and cultural architects has gone into debunking, dismantling, or deconstructing all that is good and beautiful, to be replaced with the shallow, the ugly, the ephemeral.